Man, I am on a roll with these Famicom games. Anyway, this is Cocoron, and this is a really cool game. Now, the plot of this game is a magical blue dancing pajama wearing tapir appears to you and is apparently some sort of dream wizard because he wants to give you a really super cool dream. So basically, you're sent into this dream and you have to go rescue a princess and have a bunch of high-flying swashbuckling adventures. Or something. Look, it's in Japanese. I'm working with what I've got here. But I think that the setup for the story is quite good, as it helps ground some of the gaminess of the locales. Because it's a dream, it doesn't necessarily need to have continuity between its levels. One minute you could be in space, the other you could be under the sea. And because it's a dream, I think it works well. Now, the gameplay is a fairly simple platformer. If I had to draw comparisons, I would say it's a little bit like Mega Man, although the platforming is not quite as solid. There's also two other major differences between Cocoron and Mega Man. First and foremost, you're not playing as Mega Man. That's obvious, but what isn't obvious is that this game actually has a fairly in-depth character creator. So let's just talk about this for a sec. At the start of the game, you are given the chance to create your character, and you do so by choosing your character's face, body type, as well as weapon. Now, the face and body type each have two statistics. One of them is weight, and the other is health. Generally speaking, the heavier your character is, the more health they'll have, but they'll move very slowly and they won't be able to jump very high. In addition to health and weight, the body type also changes various platforming mechanics. There's some that allow you to hover over short distances. There is a body that is a boat, which allows you to float over water. While not big changes, they do end up helping to create your own personal character and really influence your decision on what piece of equipment you want at what time. Your third piece of character customization is the weapon. And there's quite a few different options to work with, but the problem with the weapons is, while each one behaves slightly differently, some are bombs that drop straight to the ground, others are shots that fly in a sine wave pattern, others are straight shots, and there's a few others. There's one that is just straight up better than all the others, the shuriken. It's a little bit heavier than the rest of the weapons, but it does a ton of damage. When you upgrade it, it'll be able to shoot behind you and above you to cover pretty much every direction, and it's a lot easier to aim than some of the other ones. So the weapon choice is a little bit predetermined. I mean, you could use the other ones, but if Cocoron is like Mega Man, then the shuriken is essentially the metal blade, so to speak. But as a whole, this game has character creation on the Famicom. That is mind-blowing to me. I didn't think that this was a thing that was really even available yet. And yet, not only does this game give you character customization, but it gives you quite a variety. There's 3 different types of each head. So if you wanted a robot, you could have like the standard generic sci-fi robot. You could have one that looks suspiciously like a Gundam, or you could have one that looks like Robbie the Robot. And what's really cool? Each individual face has a close-up on the option screen. That was just a nice little detail, but I really appreciated it. But I know what you're thinking, this game's in Japanese. I can't read numbers, so I can't tell if I like this body type over another one. Well, you know what? That's perfectly fine, because after you create your character, you're taken to a little demo area where you can test your character out. If you don't like it, you can go back to any step of the character creation and modify that individual choice. So you could change your face, or if you want a different body but don't want to change your face or weapons, you can do that without destroying your other choices. That was an incredible amount of forethought put into that, and I have to give credit where credit's due. That's very cool. Now, the second difference between Cocoron and Mega Man is when you defeat a boss in Mega Man, you get a boss's weapon, right? That's part of the charm. Well, in Cocoron, you don't do that. In Cocoron, when you beat a boss, your magical tapir friend comes in and allows you to make an additional character. You can have up to 6, which means you can make several different characters of varying specs. So if one boss is just too strong and you need a little bit more health, you can use your backup character. That's totally fine, because you've got 5 others. The only drawback to this is, once you've made a character, you can't reuse the same body type. So like, if you have the flying super long hover body, you can't use that specific one again. Now there's always a second variation of every body type, so you can use each one twice, but you can't go crazy and give every character the same body type. And that's a bit unfortunate, but that's a concession I'm willing to make. Now the mechanics of the game are fairly simple. You jump, you shoot, you run to the right, or sometimes, if you've picked a level to transition to that's to the left, you run to the left. That was a neat touch. And while the platforming isn't quite as spot on as Mega Man, in that you can't necessarily predict exactly where you'll land based on getting a feel for your character, because everyone jumps at different heights based on their statistics, I'd still say that the platforming is still very solid. My only other gripe with the basic mechanics of the game is that when you kill an enemy, they drop an item. It's in this little egg, you gotta crack it open. Sometimes it'll be a small health power-up, other times it'll help upgrade your weapon. The problem is, later on, these weapon upgrades do become a bit mission critical, so there is a bit of grinding. And the fact that you have to end up stopping and breaking the egg open to pick up your power-up, it does slow down the flow quite a bit. And that's really unfortunate. But that's really the only bit of gameplay that feels really unnatural. While we're on the topic of enemies, there's only about half a dozen different types. Now I know that sounds negative, but they actually address the problem of only having about half a dozen different basic enemies. In the fact that, while there's only about 6 or 7 different enemies, every different environment that you encounter them in, they'll behave differently. So if you're in the Milk Ocean, the armadillos you run into won't curl up into a ball and charge after you. Instead, they're using their shells as a raft, and then they'll dive off their raft shell and come and attack you. I thought that was really cool, and honestly, running into all the different variations not only kept me guessing about how to tackle each standard enemy, but it gave each different enemy its own personality. The environments are all well done, and while each individual stage feels separate from the other different bits of the world, it is one large open world of sorts. Between levels, you are on the world map. You pick where you want to go, and then you go there. And on your way between levels, the levels transition between one tile set and layout to another. So you could start out in the castle, but halfway towards your destination of the next boss, in, say, the fairy forest, it'll turn into a forest, and you'll start running into the enemies that are styled for the forest. The fact that transitioning between areas happened on the fly and flowed naturally made this world feel like it was one large living entity, and that's just absolutely brilliant. The soundtrack was fairly well done. A lot of it's upbeat and catchy, and I do find myself actually humming the boss theme a lot. In fact, the only reason I didn't choose to use that as the background theme for this review was the fact that it's about a 15-second loop. In fact, the soundtrack ended up being so good that the indie game version ended up taking the soundtrack for itself. Make of that what you will, but it is a solid soundtrack. This game has an incredible amount of replay value. You can choose which order you want to tackle all the different levels, and of course, most importantly, you can really play around with the character creator because it is impressively robust, especially for a game on the Famicom. Now I know what you're thinking. This game looks awesome. Why didn't this game get a sequel? Well, it kinda sorta almost did, but then didn't. I've seen a few magazine scans that showed Cocoron either having a sequel or a remake on the PC engine, and unfortunately it never came to be, but at the same time I still don't think that the PC engine / TurboGrafx 16 was a console that ever existed, so I can't feel too bad about that, although I am still bitter we never got a sequel to this incredibly solid platformer. I would love to tell you that this game is easy to get a hold of and relatively inexpensive, but that would be untrue. It tends to greatly vary in price, but the less expensive options tend to be around $50 to $60, with the more expensive ones being over $100. But if you can play this, and you can find it cheap, absolutely grab it. And honestly, I just find it really depressing that the only historical footnote this game will ever provide is that it provided the soundtrack to Aversion, a game that is nowhere near as fun as Cocoron.